Shalom everyone. Today we will study together Parashat Lech Lecha, the building of a family. We will take you on a journey to try to understand and to try to really investigate the founder of our nation, Abraham. We don't know much about him, but we do know that he was the founder of the Jewish family and the Jewish nation. He was the one obviously responsible for later on generations, Yitzchak and Jacob and all the other children and the tribes and the nation of Israel. And we will try to understand today, why was he chosen, what was his family background, and what exactly were his goals. So the Torah states the following: Vayichi Terach 70 shana, and Terach was 70 years. Vayoled et Avram et Nachor ve'et Haran. So he gave birth to Avram, Nachor and Haran. And then, ve'ele toldot Terach, and these are the generations of Terach. Terach olid et Avram, Terach gave birth to Avram, to Nachor, to Haran, and Haran gave birth to Lot. Obviously we see that between verse 26 and 27, it seems to be that there is a repetition. We already know that Terach gave birth to Avram, to Nachor, and to Haran. The only new thing that we now know on verse 27 is that Haran also gave birth to Lot. And then, Vayamot Haran al pnei Terach aviv be'eretz muladeto be'ur kasdim. So Haran passed away while Terach, his father, was still alive, in the land of his birth, in Ur Kasdim. This verse also is a little bit perplexing because A, it seems to be that we really don't need to know that Haran passed away while Terach was alive. What exactly that detail gives us. And also, we don't know exactly where is Ur Kasdim. And then, verse 29, Vayikach Avram ve'Nachor lahem nashim. So Avram and Nachor got married. Shem eshet Avram Sarai. Avram's wife's name is Sarai. Veshem eshet Nachor Milka. And Nachor's wife's name is Milka. Bat Haran. She is the daughter of Haran that we just learned that he passed away. Avi Milka ve'avi Iska. He is the father of Milka and the father of Iska. And then, it seems to be that the Torah feels that it's something very, very important to tell us, Vateyi Sarai akara ein lavalad. Sarai was barren, she has no children. Which obviously, again, seems to be repetitive. If she was barren, it means she was childless. So why do we need to have to say it twice? And then, the journey begins. Vayikach Terach et Avram bno, so Terach took Avram his son, et Lot ben Haran ben bno, Lot his grandson, ve'et Sarai kalato, and Sarai his daughter-in-law, eshet Avram bno, vayetzu ita me'ur kasdim, and they left all Ur Kasdim lalechet arza Canaan, to travel to the land of Canaan, vayavo at Haran vayeshvu sham, and they reached Haran, and they settled there. And then, vayu yemei Terach 5 shanim u'matayim shana, Terach lived for 205 years, Vayamot Terach becharan, and Terach died in Haran, and he didn't make it to the land of Canaan. So this entire narrative has so many questions, and I just highlighted few, but one question that I think need to be calculated and need to be taken into consideration is that we always thought that Hashem told Abraham to go, and he was the one to leave his birthplace, to leave his house, and to go to Canaan. But this narrative gives us a bit of a different story. This narrative basically says that Terach, Abraham's father, already started the journey to go towards the land of Canaan without God telling anyone what to do, but he died in Haran. And then I guess Abraham continued the journey. So when you look at Abraham's family, we have different figures. We have Terach, we have Haran, we have Lot, we have Sarai, we have Milka, and then we have different locations. We have Ur Kasdim, we have Haran, and we have the land of Canaan. So we need to try to make some order and to organize a bit Abraham's story, which is our story. So the Midrash Lekach Tov, which is a little bit of a late Midrash, around the 11th century, says the following, Ve'ele toldot terach. These are the generations of Terach. Zu osif al toldot Shem shezachar lemala. Which means, the Midrash wants to highlight that the word ve'ele, with the letter Vav, which basically continue from what was before, the Midrash explains that the pasuk, that the verse ve'ele toldot Terach, means what? The Terach and Avraham and Nahor and Haran and Lot were basically the descendants of Shem. Shem, who was the son of Noach, who was chosen to be the more, I would say, righteous son of Noach's children. So to tell you that there is a link, that there is a connection between Terach and mostly Avraham to Shem. So that's why it says ve'ele, to add to Shem's descendants. So that's one aspect. And then there is a second aspect. Terach, shnei pe'amim. Now the Midrash addresses the issue that it says Terach twice, and if you see in the source number 1, it says Vayechi Terach, and then Ve'ele toldot Terach, Terach holid et Avram. If you see on verse 27, it says Terach twice, which is obviously superfluous. So the Midrash understands that it comes to teach us something, which is Odi'anu HaKatuv, the narrative basically shared with us, Ki asa tshuva, that he did tshuva, he repented. V'chen hu omer ve'ata tavo el avotecha b'shalom. And there is a proof that Hashem says to Avraham, before Avraham's death, he says, you will return to your ancestors with peace, which means you will join Terach in a righteous place, because Terach also did tshuva. Now this Midrash, on one hand, revealed to us something interesting, that Terach did tshuva, which obviously create the environment that Avram already was raised in an atmosphere or an environment of a person who was able to admit his failures and to be a better person. But the question that we need to ask now is, why did Terach need to do tshuva? What kind of sins, what kind of transgressions he did that required tshuva? So let's leave that question aside for a second, and let's see source number 3. Yalkut Shimoni, in another Midrash, tells us the story, one of the most famous stories about Avraham, but there are certain details there that are not as famous. So let's do it. Vayamot Haran al pnei Terach. So Haran, we asked that question, that the narrative told us that Haran, who was one of Terach's children, he passed away while his father was still alive. And we asked the question, why do we need to do it? How is exactly this detail help us to understand more about Avraham and his family? So the Midrash says the following. Terach mocher tzlamim hava. Terach was basically, he had a store where he sold idols, all different types of idols. Chad zman nafak lechad atar. So one time he went on a vacation, he went out of town. Ve'oshiv Avraham mocher tachtav. So he placed Avraham to sell those idols instead of him. So Terach left the store and he basically asked his son Avraham, please replace me, substitute for me, and sell idols in that store. Have'ati bar Noach bai mazbin le. So someone, Bar Noach, one of the children of Noach, came to buy an idol. Amar le bar kama shninat. So Avraham said to that person, how old are you? Amar le bar nun, bar shishim. I'm 50, I'm 60 years old. Amar le, so Avraham said to that person, there is some cynicism obviously in this midrash. He says to him, Vai le'ahu gavra, de'ave bar nun bar shishim, ve'bai le'mizgad le'aden, de'havid yom aden. Which means, he says to that person, to the client, who just came to buy an idol. He asks him, how old are you? He says, I'm 50, I'm 60. He says to him, Oy vey. I don't think I need to translate oy vey. It says, oy vey to you. You are 50 and 60 years old, and you come here to buy an idol that I just made yesterday. Aren't you embarrassed? You're going to bow down to an idol that is 1 day old when you are 50 or 60 years old? כיוון דאמר לכן, הווה מתבייש והולך. So after that person heard what Abraham told him, he says, you know what, you are right. I'm embarrassed. And he left, and he didn't buy an idol. חד זמן, איתת חדה איתתה, תאינה חד פינח דסולת. אמרה לה, הלך קרב קדמהון. So, one day, a woman came to the store when Abraham was there, and she brought a basket with food, and she asked Abraham to sacrifice some of that food to one of those idols. קם נסב בוקלסה ותברינון. יהב בוקלסה בידה דרבה, דהבה ביניהון. So, what did he do? He said, you know what? I am going to do something interesting. He took a little stick, he broke one of the idols, he took that stick and he placed it in the hand of the largest idol in the store. כיוון דעתה הבua, so when Avram's father came back to town, אמר לה, מן עביד לון כדין. So he says, what exactly happened in the store? I just left for a few days and some of those idols are broken. אמר לה, מניח פור מנח. I said, I'm not going to lie to you, says Avraham. איתת חדה איתתה תאינה לי חד פינח דסולת. Says, a woman came to the store and she brought me a basket with food to sacrifice. אמרה לי קרב קדמהון, והווה דין, אמר אנא אכיל קודמוי, ודין אמר אנא אכיל קודמוי. He says, there was a fight. There was a fight between the idols. Because of that woman brought one basket to sacrifice. So the idols had a debate. Who is going to get the food first? So they start fighting. So they start breaking each other. קם חד הרבה דהבה ביניהם, ונסב בוקלסה ותברינון. Says this large idol that has the stick, he broke all the other idols because of their fight about the food that woman brought to the store. You obviously understand the cynicism in this story. So, Amale, mat maflibi, v'yadin inun. He says, so Avraham's father looked at Avraham, Terach looked at Avraham and says to him, my son, are you joking me? Don't you think that I am smarter than that? I know they can't move, so someone else broke those idols. They didn't have a fight. So Avraham says to Terach, Amale, ולא ישמעו אוזניך מפיך מדבר? So Avram says to his father, my dear father, with all due respect, did you hear what you just said? You cannot believe that they fought, right? You cannot believe that they broke each other. And you still sell those idols to people and tell them to believe in them? Father, with all due respect, you need to change your mind about this idol worshipping. So, Nasbeu masbele Nimrod. So Terach got very upset with his son and he took him to Nimrod. Nimrod was the head of the Babylonian tower and he was an idol worshipper and he was the leader of that generation. Amar le nizgod lenura. So Nimrod says to Avram, you know what, let's worship the fire. Amar le nizgod lemaya de matfi nura. So Avram says to Nimrod, no, it's better to worship water because water are more powerful than fire. They can extinguish fire. Amar le v'nizgod lemaya. So Nimrod says to Avraham, no, okay, you know what, you are correct. Let's worship to the water. Says Avraham to him, nizgod le'anana, the tie in Maya. I said, no, we should worship the clouds because the clouds bring the water. So Nimrod says to Avraham, Amar le v'nizgod le'anana. Okay, so we worship the cloud. Amar le nizgod lerucha de mevadri le'anana. So Avraham is playing along with Nimrod. Says, no, we should worship the wind. Because the wind is powerful to what? To bring the clouds and to make them disappear. Amar le v'nizgod lerucha. So he says, okay, let's worship the wind. It sounds like a Chadgadia. Amar le nizgod lebarnash de savil rucha. So Avram says to Nimrod, no, we can't worship the wind. We should worship a person because he is the one who is able to what? To overcome wind. Amar le milin at mishtai, ani eini mishtachave, אלא לאור. הריני משליחך לתוכו, ויבוא אלוה שאתה משתחווה לו, ויציל אותך ממנו. So Nimrod had enough. He says, מספיק. Enough. My God is the fire. And therefore, I am going to worship the fire and I'm going to throw you into the furnace, into the fire. And let's see. if your God is so powerful, he will save you. And if not, you will burn to death. Havetaman Haran. So Haran, you remember him? He was the one who passed away while Terach was still alive. That's Abraham's brother. Amar ma nafshach. I Avraham nitzach min Avraham ana. Ve'i Nimrod nitzach min Nimrod ana. So just imagine, and this is where it becomes now dramatic. Avram's family is around the fire, and they see Nimrod is about to throw Avram into the fire. And everyone looks at them and they ask them, are you with Avram or are you with Nimrod? And Haran says, you know what? I'm going to sit on the fence. If Avram is being saved, so I'm going to believe in his God. And if Nimrod is right and Avram will be burned to death, I'm going to be with Nimrod. כיוון שירד אברהם לכבשן האש וניצו, so Avram was put into the fire and God saved him. אמר לה, man deman at, so Nimrod saw that Avram was saved, so he went to Haran and says to him, are you with me or are you with him? אמר לה, דאברהם אנה, I'm sure I'm with Avraham. נטלו וישליכו לאור ונחמרו בני מאב. So Haran was thrown into the fire like Avraham, but with one difference. God did not save him. ויצא ומת על פני תרח אביו. And he died. So the Midrash gives us now the reason what is the reason that the narrative thought that it is so important to know that Haran died while Terach was alive. And the answer for that is that we need to know that Haran had only 50% belief. He was waiting to see God's power in order to believe in him. And that's why he died. The Midrash is sending us a very strong message, not so much about Haran, but rather about Avraham. Avraham didn't hear God telling him to be thrown into the fire. Until that day, Avraham had zero conversations with God, nothing. Avraham just had this faith that we will obviously elaborate on it much later in the shiur, much later in the class. But Avraham believed in God without seeing even one miracle. He had that faith. He had that emunah. And with that emunah, with that faith, he was thrown into the fire and God saved him. That's in a way the first encounter, indirect encounter between Avraham and God, which obviously begs the question of how come that Avraham built such faith in God that he never had any communication with. But Haran, he was someone who was sitting on the fence. And therefore, he passed away. And that is the reason for the narrative to tell us, because it's not so much about Haran, it's really about Avraham. So now we know a little bit about Avraham's family. You have Terach, who had a store to sell idols. He was very upset with what Avraham did. Avraham was thrown into the fire. He was saved. Haran, his brother, was sitting on the fence. He died. And now we don't know exactly what's going on now with Terach. Because I can just imagine, and I'm sure you as well, that now there is some tension between Nimrod and Avraham's family. Avraham is obviously a miracle, but none of his family members. So I assume that people harass Avraham's family and asking them, do you believe in God or do you believe in Nimrod? Do you believe in the fire or you believe in the water? So it's obviously not a wonderful atmosphere and environment for Avraham's family in Ur Kasdim. So there is one more midrash that I want to learn with you regarding Haran. Vayamot Haran al pnei terach aviv. Again, we are talking about Avraham's brother Haran. So the midrash says, "B'chayei aviv met lefi sheishlichu et Avraham lekivshan ha'esh v'ala misham leshalom." The midrash says they threw Avraham to the fire and he was saved. היו כולם אומרים על הרן, לפי שהיה עובד לאש, לכך נשא האש פנים לאברהם בשביל אחיו, ולא הזיקו האור. Now this midrash has a different perspective. The midrash says that when Avraham was thrown into the fire and he was saved, most of the people attributed it to Haran. Haran worshipped the fire, like Nimrod. and probably like that entire generation. So the people who saw Abraham thrown into the fire and is being saved, they did not attribute it to God. They attributed it to Haran. They said, oh, it's because of his brother who was a fire worshipper, and because the God of fire loved Haran, he also had mercy on Abraham. מה עשה הקדוש ברוך הוא? So what did Hashem do? הוציא שביב אש מן הכבשן והרג את הרן. So God took out like a little spark from the fire and it basically hit Haran and killed him, in order to show that it was God saving Abraham and not Haran. This midrash is very different than the first one. The first one portrays Haran as someone who does not have faith in God and is someone who sits on the fence and he basically, he puts his bets on the winning horse, so to speak. Here, Haran in a way pays the price because of other people. So now we have a second reason and a second explanation of why was that so important for the narrative to tell us that Haran passed away while Terach was alive. Is the first midrash says, because we want to show you the difference between Haran and Avraham. The second midrash says, because Haran in a way was an obstacle for God to basically reveal himself in full force. Because if there are still people who think that Abraham was saved because of Haran, that will be an obstacle in full faith in God. So in a way, Haran is a tragic figure. He was an obstacle that had to be removed in order for Abraham to really start his journey. So it's very interesting to note that we have two different perspectives on Haran, which also affects how we look on Abraham. Then, there is another midrash, a Lech, that also has something to say about this story of Avraham and the fire. It says, וימות הרן על פני תרח אביו, and Haran died while Terach was still alive, שעד עתה, that until now, לא מת הבן לפני האב. וזה למה מת? The midrash says that until that moment, children did not die before their parents. But this one, Haran, did. So why? על מעשה אור כשדים. So the midrash has an answer. It's because of this story about אור כשדים, שהיה אברהם משבר אלילי תרח, that Avraham broke all the idols that belonged to his father, ונתקנאו בו, and some people got very upset with him, והשליכו לכבשן האש, and they threw him into the fire, והרן עמד לאוויר האש. And now look at this midrash, a third perspective. Haran, Avraham's brother, wanted to what? To start the fire, to burn his own brother. Now, obviously, the portray and the way that Haran is being described, he is a villain. He is vicious. He wants to kill his brother. וליאתה אותו שלהבת. And instead of starting the fire probably caught on to his clothes or to his garments, and he was burned to death. לכך נאמר, וימות הרן על פני תרח אביו. I purposely shared with you three different perspectives about Haran, because sometimes we are so obsessed with Abraham's image and Abraham's characteristic and nature and his decisions and his tests and trials that we sometimes lose sight from the fact that the Torah presented Abraham first and foremost as part of a family. He had a father, Terach. We don't know his mother's name, not in the narrative. We know his wife, we know of his two brothers, we know of his nephew. It was important for the Torah to tell us, to share with us, who is Abraham's family. And to tell us about this, according to some midrashim, this animosity, this even Haran was vicious to burn your own brother, that's the third midrash, or to sit on the fence and not really to be with your brother. This is the atmosphere, this is the environment that Avram had to overcome. So now we begin our journey. we really, I hope, start to understand a little bit about Avraham, and not only Avraham as an individual, but Avraham vis-a-vis his family. So now, after we spoke about the family, let's speak a little bit about birthplace. As I mentioned at the beginning of the class, we really have 3 locations. Ur Kasdim, which seems to be Abraham's birthplace. We have Haran, another place that we don't know yet where it is, and the land of Canaan, which is the land of Israel. Now, before we start the Ramban, and we're not going to read all of it because it is a little bit long, that's source number 6. I just want to comment that we always view Abraham as basically that he came from where? Ever Anar, the other side of the river. And therefore, we are a little surprised that nowhere in the narrative that we just read, that it says that Avraham and Terach and his family were basically, they dwelled in Ever Anar. It says Ur Kasdim. Where is Ur Kasdim? Is there a location like that? Is there a place like that? Says Ramban Nachmanides in the 13th century, says the following: Avraham Avinu lo nolad be'eretz Kasdim. He says Avraham was not born in the land of the Kasdim. Ki avotav bnei Shem hayu, because his ancestors were the children of Shem, the son of Noach. Ve'Kasdim ve'chol eretz Shin'ar artzot bnei Cham. And Kasdim are the descendants of Cham, another child of Noach. But they were separated. Shem was in a different location, and Ham was in a different location. He was in Kasdim. So therefore, says Ramban, we cannot say that Ur Kasdim is Abraham's birthplace, because Abraham is a Shemite. He is not a descendant of Ham. והכתוב אומר, ויגד לאברהם העברי, לא הכסדי. וכתיב בעבר הנהר ישבו אבותיכם מעולם, תרח אבי אברהם ואבי נחור. So the Ramban basically substantiate his claim by saying, look, there are other phrases, sentences, verses in the Tanakh that prove my point. We refer to Avraham as Avraham Ha'ivri, Ever HaNa'ar, the other side of the river, not Kasdi. And therefore, he says, and I'm skipping a bit, Aval be'emet, the second paragraph. Aval be'emet, but truthfully, says the Ramban, Eretz muladetam, Eretz Aram hi, be'ever hana'ar. Abraham's birthplace is in Aram. It's the other side of the land of Canaan, the other side of the river. Vehi minachalat avotav me'olam. Ve'inehu ve'avotav min ha'aretz ha'i me'olam. He says, always, Abraham's family was in Aram, and not Ur Kasdim. So we obviously will need to understand what does it mean, Ur Kasdim. And then, says the Ramban, Umatzinu batalmud, we found in the Talmud in Baba Batra, in Tractate Baba Batra, page 91a, Ki Avraham nechbash bekuta, that Avraham was imprisoned in Kuta, וזאת העיר, and this city איננם בארץ Kasdim, but it's in a different place. So therefore, says Ramban, אבל ייראה כי היא עיר בעבר הנהר בארץ ארם נהריים. So basically what the Ramban does, he basically in a way paints the region. So there is Aram Naharaim, which I guess is the country, and then you have regions. So you have Haran, you have Kuta, and what is Ur Kasdim? So Ur Kasdim is what? So I'm skipping a bit. והנה תרח הוליד בניו הגדולים אברהם ונחור בעבר הנהר ארץ אבותיו, והלך לו עם אברהם בנו אל ארץ כסדים, ושם נולד לו בנו הקטן הרן. So the Ramban is making up a story here which is amazing based on different midrashim, is that really Avraham was born in Aram Naharaim. Then from whatever reason, Terach took Avraham and he took Nahor to Ur Kasdim. And Haran, Avraham's baby brother, was born there. And Nahor בנו נשאר בעבר הנהר בעיר חרן, או שנולד בעיר ההיא או שנתיישב במיקותה, וזה טעם בארץ מולדתו באור כסדים, כי שם מולדתו של הרן לבדו. So Ramban says Ur Kasdim was not Abraham's birthplace. That was Haran's birthplace. Which, by the way, explains again the difference between Haran and Abraham. Haran was born in a place of idol worshippers, of fire worshippers, and it probably affected his nature. Abraham was not from there. Now, before we continue, I just want to highlight a very important point in Ramban's interpretation. The Ramban goes out of his way to prove to us that Abraham was not born in Ur Kasdim. And why? It's not only because of all the other verses in the narrative that basically seems to indicate that Abraham was really born on the other side of the Jordan River. It's not only that. It's because the Ramban and so many other commentators try to make sure to link Abraham to Shem, Noah's son, who was the most righteous of all Noah's 3 children. We need to know, says the Ramban, that Abraham is a direct descendant of Shem. And therefore, there are many ramifications to it. A, in terms of behavior. B, in terms of faith. C, in terms of the land, the inheritance, which is Eretz Canaan. So, I will skip this Ramban and to the last paragraph. וזהו טעם ויצאו איתם מאור כסדים ללכת ארצה כנען ויבואו עד חרן אשר שם משפחותיהם ואבותיהם מעולם וישבו ביניהם ונתעכבו שם ימים רבים. So the Ramban portrayed the following story. Let's begin. Terach, the father, lives in Aram Naharaim. He has 2 children, Avraham and Nahor. Then, from whatever reason, he goes to Ur Kasdim. Then he has another son, Haran. At that place, perhaps, Terach opens up a store and he sells idols. That's where the story really happens. Avraham breaks those idols. He was thrown into the fire. Haran, his baby brother, is a villain or he's just a victim, whatever it is, according to all the midrashim that we mentioned before. And then because of Terach's fear from Nimrod and from all the people in Ur Kasdim, that they definitely dislike Avraham because of what he did, he returns back to his birthplace, which is where? In Haran. And he goes back to his family. However, שם נצטווה אברהם לעשות מה שעלה בדעתו ללכת ארצה כנען ועזב את אביו ומת שם בחרן ארצו והוא הלך עם אשתו ולוט בן אחיו ארצה כנען. So basically, after Avraham goes back from Ur Kasdim, basically probably he had to flee the country, he goes back to his birthplace, and then God appears to Avraham and says to him, go to the land that I will show you, and basically Avraham just need to cross the river to go to the land of Canaan. Now, I'm not going to elaborate too much on all these geographical journeys and all those locations that the Ramban mentioned, but I would like to share one very important message that we can derive from the Ramban, which is Avraham never heard God talking to him before he threw himself into the fire. God appeared to Avraham and told him to begin his journey only in a way after Avraham showed full faith in God that he never spoke to him. Which obviously brings the question of what was that Avraham knew or thought that caused him to have so much faith to the extent that he is willing to die for his faith in the God that he never spoke to. That's what comes out from the Ramban. God had the first commandment to Avraham only after Avraham was tested if he is willing to give his life. As a side note, next week in Parashat Vayera, we will discuss Parashat Akedah, the binding of Isaac. There seems to be that there is a very interesting link between the two parashot. Abraham was chosen only after he was willing to give his life without hearing it from God, and Yitzchak and Isaac is willing to sacrifice his life without really a direct commandment from God about it. So just have it in mind for next week when we study the binding of Isaac. So let's go back to Abraham. So according to the Ramban, what do we need to know? He was not born in Ur Kasdim. That was not his birthplace. He was born in Aram Naharaim. He went to Ur Kasdim. He was thrown into the fire, went back to his house. God revealed himself to him, and then he started his journey. Rabbeinu Bachya adds another interesting detail that we need to know. וימות הרן על פני תרח אביו בארץ מולדתו באור כסדים. So Haran, as we mentioned before, died while his father was alive in his birthplace in Ur Kasdim. Says Rabbeinu Bachya, הכתוב הזה יודיע אותנו. This verse will teach us. מעלתו של אברהם שמסר עצמו למיתה על אמונת השם יתברך. It gives us the tremendous glory and praise to Abraham, who was willing to give his life because of his faith. ואלמלא רמז הכתוב הזה היה ראוי להודיענו תחילת מעלתו של אברהם והנהגתו ומידותיו. ואז ויאמר השם אל אברהם, כי איך ייתכן להיות דיבור השם יתברך לאדם ולא הודיענו תחילה מיהו? He says, the Rabbeinu Bachya asked an obvious question that we probably had to ask at the beginning of the shiur. He says, Abraham, the Torah basically described that Hashem spoke to Abraham and he told him, ויאמר השם אל אברהם, לך לך מארצך וממולדתך ומבית אביך. Hashem said to Abraham, you should go and leave your birthplace, your home, your family house. But who is he? Who is Abraham? We never heard about him until now. I mean, when we have Noach, we know, ויאמר אלוקים לנוח, we know about Noach. Noach is an איש צדיק, תמים היה בדורותיו, ואת האלוקים יתהלך נוח. We spoke last week a lot about Noach, that he created the plow. He was a known figure. So we can understand that God talks to him. But with Abraham, it seems to be that he came from nowhere. Therefore, says Rabbeinu Bachya, the narrative gives us a clue. He gives us a small hint. When it says, וימות הרן על פני תרח אביו בארץ מולדתו באור כסדים, when the narrative says that Haran passed away in Ur Kasdim, this word Ur Kasdim basically gives us the background story of Abraham. The story about him being thrown into the fire, the story about God saving him, the story about Haran not believing. This is all to create this narrative about Abraham. But now, let's pause for a second. What Rabbeinu Bachya said is definitely very important, because now we understand why, in a way, Abraham was chosen. What did he do so that it was so special that God decided he is going to choose him from among everyone else, and he will start to basically establish the Jewish nation, the Israelites. But there is a problem. The problem is that this story about Abraham being thrown into the fire is not mentioned in the narrative itself. Our sages were the ones to basically portray it in different angles and in different variations. But it's not the narrative itself. So that obviously begs the question of why? Wouldn't it be great to know that the narrative will give 3 psukim, 3 verses that describes Abraham. And Abraham was in Ur Kasdim, and he broke the idols, and Nimrod threw him into the fire, and God saved him. Here, 2 sentences. Why is it that the narrative itself does not tell us exactly the background story for Abraham. So that will be a challenge to Rabbeinu Bachya. Therefore, I would like to present you a different aspect of why Abraham was chosen. But before we do it, let's just take you through the journey. We learned a little bit about Abraham's family and the environment. We saw 3 different midrashim regarding Haran, Abraham's baby brother, and was he really vicious? Was he somewhat vicious? Or he was just a quote-unquote a victim? And then we talked a lot about the importance and the significance of the verse that for us looked so superfluous, not needed, not necessary, about Haran's passing while Terach was still alive. And we also tried to crystallize where exactly Abraham was born. And now we also have that it seems to be that the Midrash is really essential in order to understand why Abraham was chosen. With our question, which is, if it is so essential, why is it that the narrative does not share with us and we need to wait for the sages to tell us about Abraham's test and trial with the fire? So now, I would like to take you on a journey with the Rambam, with Maimonides. Maimonides, in the Laws of Avodah Zarah, gives us an analysis of how Avodah Zarah, how idol worshipping was basically evolved, was established and evolved. So I will read few inserts in order to give us some kind of a picture about Abraham. בימי אנוש טעו בני האדם טעות גדולה. It says in the time of Enosh, all humanity had a tremendous mistake. ונבערה עצת חכמי אותו הדור, and even the wise people of that generation basically lost their wisdom. ואנוש עצמו מן הטועים, וזו הייתה טעותם. אמרו, הואיל והאל ברא כוכבים אלו וגלגלים אלו להנהיג את העולם. Basically their mistake was what? They said, because God created the stars and the moon and the sky, and they are the one to run this universe. ונתנם במרום וחלק להם כבוד, and God placed them in heaven and He gave them quote unquote respect. So we should definitely respect them. So what did they do? They start building palaces for the stars and for the moon and for the sun in order to praise them, because they thought that that's what God wants. Meaning, because God placed the stars and the moon and the sun in the sky, and they looked at that as something which basically requires dignity and respect, so they said we should do the same thing on earth. We should build palaces and all sorts of things in order to glorify the sun, the moon, and the stars. So that was the beginning. So, at that beginning, they still all believed in God. They knew that God is the ultimate power. But the sun and the moon and the stars are like His servants, so we need to respect them. We need to show them respect. So I will call it semi-idol worshipping. They still believe in God, but they still believe that the other powers in the world that they also need to worship. אחר שהלכו הימים, and after a while, עמדו בבני האדם נביאי השקר. So now we have a problem. Now we have false prophets. People who want to use religion for their own interest and agenda. ואמרו, and they claimed, שהאל ציווה להם ואמר להם עבדו כוכב פלוני או כל הכוכבים. They claimed that God Himself told them to tell the people that they should worship only the star and the moon, and not to God. And here is how it progressed. First, they all believed in God, but they felt that they need to respect His servants, meaning the stars, the moon, the sun. And now there is the shift. Now you have religious leaders who are false. They are liars. And they claim on behalf of God that God told them that from now on, they need to worship His servants and only His servants. And they create an industry of religion They create palaces and they appoint priests. And they say that the star or the moon has a way to be worshipped. So they tell the people who believe in them that that's what they need to do. וכיוון שערכו הימים, so after this idea is being imbued and perpetuated for so many years, נשתקע השם הנכבד והנורא מפי כל היקום ומדעתם ולא יכירו. Everyone, can you imagine that? Everyone on earth did not know that there is such a thing like God, like Hashem. ונמצא כל הארץ. הנשים והקטנים אינם יודעים אלא הצורה של עץ ואבן והיכל של בניין, שנתחנכו מקטנותן להשתחוות להן ולעובדן ולהישבע בשמן. Everyone, men, women, children, everyone, they know only one thing. We need to worship this palace, we need to worship this star, the moon, whatever the priests tell us, and they don't think. This is the only thing that they know. So no one knew God besides few individuals. Like, אבל צור העולמים לא היה שם מכירו ולא יודעו, but God himself, no one knew him, but rather only few individuals, כגון חנוך, מתושלח, נוח, שם ועבר. Only individuals knew God. Like חנוך, נוח, מתושלח. עד ועל דרך זו היה העולם מתגלגל והולך. And this is how the world just continued to move on and on and on. No one knows God, only individuals. עד שנולד עמודו של עולם. Until Abraham, who is עמודו של עולם, the pillar of the universe, שהוא אברהם אבינו עליו השלום, was born. And now, take a look how the Rambam describes Abraham. כיוון שנגמל איתן זה, התחיל לשוטט בדעתו והוא קטן. Already when he was a child, he started wondering with his mind. לחשוב ביום ובלילה, and he was thinking day and night, והיה תמה, and he wondered, איך אפשר שיהיה גלגל הזה נוהג תמיד ולא יהיה לו מנהיג? How come that this universe, with all its physics, with all its nature, continue on day by day, and there is no one who basically pushed the enter, that there is no one who runs this universe? ומי יסובב אותו שאי אפשר שיסובב את עצמו? ולא היה לו מלמד ולא מודיע דבר אלא מושקע באור כסדים בין עובדי עבודה זרה הטיפשים. The Rambam does say that Abraham was in Ur Kasdim, and he says he had no teacher, no education, no one told him about God. He himself realized that there is something wrong with their faith. It's unbearable to think that there is no one, there is no entity that really runs this universe. ואביו ואמו וכל העם עובדים עבודה זרה. Not only that there is no teacher to teach him, his parents, his family, his entire neighborhood, they all worship idols. והוא היה עובד עמהן, says the Rambam. Avraham worship idols. וליבו משוטט ומבין. But his heart, his mind was not there. עד שהשיג דרך האמת. והבין קו הצדק מדעתו הנכונה. Then he realized by himself the true path and the true line of justice. וידע שיש שם אלוה אחד והוא מנהיג הגלגל והוא ברא הכל. He realized by himself, no teachers, hostile environment, no education. He himself worshiped idols, but he realized that it is time to end it. There is a God. He is the one to run the universe. וידע שכל העם טועים. ודבר שגרם להם לטעות. He knew that everyone else was mistaken, and he knew the reason for their mistake. ובן 40 שנה הכיר אברהם את בורו. So when Abraham was 40 years old, he recognized God. God did not talk to him yet. Don't forget. Another 30 to 35 years needs to go by until God says to Abraham, Lech Lecha. But Abraham already at the age of 40, from his own mind, from his inner understanding, he realized that there is a God. The Rambam basically portrays Abraham almost as a philosopher. If you want, you can look at the Guide of the Perplexed. The Rambam really think highly on the philosophers, that they can think, they can wonder. Abraham in a way was the first thinker. He realized God from nature, not from learning in a yeshiva or in a seminar or in a study hall. He understood it from his own understanding of life, nature, physics of the world. So when at the age of 40 he realized God by himself, so what does he do? כיוון שהכיר וידע, התחיל להשיב תשובות על בני אור כסדים ולערוך דין עמהם, ולומר שאין זו דרך האמת. He didn't keep this faith and his understanding to himself. He starts spreading it all over town. And he starts making debates with the idol worshippers. And he basically says to them, what you're saying is nonsense. ושיבר הצלמים. And he starts breaking idols. והתחיל להודיע לעם שאין ראוי לעבוד אלא לאלוה העולם ולא ראוי להשתחוות. So he starts spreading his beliefs. He starts creating a movement. And that's what distinguishes Abraham from Metushelach, from Noach, from Shem and Ever. He does not create a cocoon for himself and for another few individuals. Abraham is creating a movement. Abraham creates a movement of monotheism. He does not create monotheist people, individuals. He creates a movement. So obviously, when you create a movement like that, ביקש המלך להורגו. The king, which is Nimrod, wanted to kill him. Because that's what you do when you have someone against you. ונעשה לו נס. And a miracle took place. And he was saved from death. ויצא לחרן. So he went to Haran. והתחיל לעמוד ולקרות בקול גדול לכל העם ולהודיעם שיש אלוה אחד לכל העולם ולא ראוי לעבוד. And after he left Ur Kasdim, he starts spreading the news. There is one God. This is the God that you need to worship. והיה מהלך וקורא ומקבץ העם מעיר לעיר ומממלכה לממלכה עד שהגיע לארץ כנען. So he starts walking and going from one city to another and starts spreading the truth about God, and he starts gathering a momentum and people start joining him עד שהגיע לארץ כנען, until he reached the land of Canaan. והוא קורא שנאמר ויקרא שם בשם השם כל עולם, and he proclaimed God's name everywhere. וכיוון שהיו העם מתקבצים לו ושואלים לו על דבריו. So people come, people joined him and start asking him, can you please tell me about the God? What do we need to do? What are the values that we need to believe in? היה מודיע לכל אחד ואחד לפי דעתו עד שיחזירהו לדרך האמת. So he would explain God's philosophy, values, expectations to everyone. עד שנתקבצו אליו אלפים ורבבות. Hundreds of thousands of people joined him. והם אנשי בית אברהם, and those are the family, the people of Abraham. ושתל בליבם העיקר הגדול בזה. He imbued in their heart, he planted in their heart this faith, this fundamental that there is one God. וחיבר בו ספרים. He wrote books about it. והודיע ליצחק בנו, and he taught יצחק his son. וישב יצחק מלמד ומחזיר, and Yitzchak did the same thing. He also taught all those people. ויצחק הודיע ליעקב ומינהו ללמד, וישב מלמד ומחזיר כל הנלווים עליו. This is an incredible description of the Rambam about Avraham Avinu. Avraham Avinu chose God before he was chosen. But unlike Rabbeinu Bachayai or Ramban that attributed it to what? To Avraham's willingness to throw himself into the fire and to die on Kiddush Hashem, according to the Rambam, Avraham's merit and the reason he was chosen, it was because of his cognitive abilities, his pure heart of not going with the flow, and realizing God from within himself. If I'll pause here, we can definitely see that there are two main reasons why Abraham was chosen, and those two reasons continue to be part of the Jewish people. On one hand, the willingness to give our lives for God's faith and for believing in God. And the second, the Rambam, Maimonides' reason, we always think, we don't go with the flow. Even if what we think is not popular, even if we are the minority, if we believe that this is true, this is emet, we are willing to stand by ourselves on the other side of the river because we know that the truth is with us. So in the next 2 to 3 minutes, I'm just going to touch on one more question that we spoke about. We spoke about the fact that Sarai was barren and she was childless. So Rabbeinu Bachya, and I'm just going to summarize what he says. He says basically the repetition that she was barren and she was childless come to teach us that by nature, Sarah could not have children whatsoever. And therefore, Avram and Sarai decided to go to Canaan, to the land of Canaan. Maybe, different chapter in their life, different mazel, different luck, different fortune. And maybe there they will be able to what? To build their house. But Avraham, even though he was the one with the idea to go to the land of Canaan, it says Vaikach Terach. Because Avraham wanted to give respect to his father, so he said, you know what? Terach will be the one to lead us to the land of Canaan. I'm going to skip few sources. And you know what? I'll just do the Malbim, because I think it's important. ויקח תרח, כל מה שסיפר עדנה הוא הצעה להודיע הסיבה שהניעה את תרח לצאת לארץ כנען. He says, the Malbim says, the narrative is trying to teach us why Terach had in mind to go to the land of Canaan. So he says, כי כאשר מת הרן ואברהם לא ילד, הייתה משפחתו קטנה. He says, Haran passed away, Avraham does not have children, so his family is very small. ובעת ההיא, מי שלא היה לו בנים רבים, היה חדל כוח ורפה ידיים. And at that ancient times, if you have a small family, you don't have enough power, and therefore you will be probably taking advantage. כי האב היה ראש המשפחה, ובהכרח היה כתפל אל נחור אביו שהוליד בנים ובנות. וגם שראה שאברהם בנו נרדף מנמרוד, ואף שניצול בנס לו כל יום המתרחש ניסה. Says the Malbim, Terach made a very cold calculation. I'm a very small family. My son, my baby son, is dead. Avram is being chased by Nimrod. Everyone dislike him. So I don't have enough family members. So therefore, I am going to want to escape to Canaan. Why? Because in Canaan, that was a separate region. It belonged to the Shemites. And Nimrod, who has his kingdom in Kasdim, he is not going to what? To go after us. So this is an interesting thing. Terach already planned to go to the land of Canaan. Because of what? What I will call natural reasons. Small family, Avraham is chased, he's afraid. Avraham goes to the land of Canaan in order to what? To build a spiritual movement and to work on his spiritual growth. Again, you see something very interesting. The land of Canaan that became the land of Israel has these two components. It should be a shelter, a place where Jews can go and feel protected, and at the same time it needs to be a place of spiritual growth. So let's sum up everything we did today. I think we have a better appreciation of why Abraham was chosen. Unlike anyone else, he chose God before he was chosen. How come that he had that tremendous faith? According to Ramban and Rabbeinu Bachya, we don't know exactly, but he was willing to give his life for it. According to the Rambam, he described him more of as a philosopher, as a thinker, as someone who wandered with his mind and get the truth from within himself. Everything about Abraham teaches us about ourselves. Not once, not twice. We live in an environment, a hostile environment, even sometimes from our own family. But we need to be like Abraham, to know to use our cognitive abilities, to trust our inner feelings and faith, and to continue this journey until we hear Hashem's calling. Lech Lecha. Continue to walk. Don't stop. There is no stop. We always continue with their journey until we will get El HaMenucha ve'el HaNachala, to the place of tranquility. Thank you.